Hello students, here we are nearing the end, right, of our year. We're in Module 15, and this is the second half of Module 15, 15B, looking at some really cool critters called amphibians, and then in the end we'll be looking at reptiles as well. So let's take a look. All right, so class Amphibia is a group of animals. We're going to see what criteria kind of defines how they fit into this group right here. First thing I want you to know is amphibia means dual life. All right, so it's a very apt description of these guys because they live part of their life in one place and part of their life in the other, namely they start in the water and then they move to the land. Okay, so let's see some of the criteria. They have a skeleton inside their body. They're vertebrates. The bone is the skeleton is made mostly of bone, but it also may have in certain places softer tissue called cartilage, similar to a human skeleton. All right, they have smooth skin with many capillaries and pigments. The pigments for different colors. They do not have scales on their skin. The skin looks wet. Okay, and this many capillaries, remember, are the really small blood vessels, and that distribute whatever the blood delivers, namely oxygen and nutrients. And so you're going to see here in a minute the reason why they have so many capillaries in their skin. It's a very important reason. They have two pair of limbs with webbed feet, okay, front legs, back legs. Now the webbed feet thing can be a little bit different depending on the critter. For instance, frogs will have a fully webbed foot because they are swimmers. They spend their time in the water even as adults. Whereas a toad, they'll have a very limited webbing in their feet. But in general, we say that they have a webbed feet, namely on the back feet. As many as 4 different organs for respiration. Wow. So that's, quote unquote breathing, but namely what it means is getting oxygen into the tissues. Okay, that's how we respire, right? And so namely what we'll be looking at is we'll be looking at gills and lungs. Those are the most obvious because they have a dual life. They use gills in part and lungs in the other part. And then they also can use their skin. All right, so that's what those capillaries are for. They're up there to absorb oxygen right straight from their skin, which is pretty cool. And then we'll be looking at their mouth as well, inside their mouth. They have a 3-chambered heart. It's different from a human heart, has 4 chambers. We're going to see a picture of this in just a minute, of the 3 different chambers and how they function. And they're oviparous. Remember what that word means, that big fancy word to mean that they lay eggs. All right, so they lay eggs outside of the female's body. And in this particular case, the fertilization takes place also outside of the female's body. So it's an external fertilization. That means the female will lay the eggs and the male will come afterwards and do a broadcast sperm over it. And that's how they get fertilized. And it's typically in the water in a pond or something like that. All right, so here's a picture of that 3-chambered heart. So you can see here what we're looking at is we have 2 upper chambers called atria, the right atrium and the left atrium, but the bottom place here is just 1 ventricle instead of 2. We have 2 ventricles. There's a little wall that separates here called the septum. We have a left and right ventricle, but they only have the 1. Notice we have what we look at: red blood, meaning fully oxygenated; blue blood, meaning oxygen depleted. It's not exactly really blue. And then we show it being purple here because it's mixed together. Okay, so that mixed blood is going to go out to the body and then go back to, here we're going to see lungs, or in particular case, perhaps into the gill area. And so this isn't necessarily the most efficient way of getting oxygenated blood, but remember, these creatures have more than one way of getting oxygen to their blood. It doesn't have to use their lungs. And so therefore, while their lungs would be taking oxygenated blood and putting it through this heart, they can also have oxygen exchange in their skin, and we're going to see in a minute in their mouths, okay? You may need to draw this, and remember in biology, whenever you're asked to draw something, you also are assumed that you are going to be labeling it. So if you need to stop the presentation here so you can draw this 3-chambered heart, this is a pretty good rendition of it, pretty, I think, easy to copy. And then the most important words that I want you to know are the ones that are in boxes: the right atrium, left atrium, ventricle, the conus arteriosus, and the sinus venosus. Those are going to be that. And then you see the big vessels leading out. You can draw arrows if you want. Depends on how artistic you would like to get. All right, so the examples of this class, Amphibia, we're going to be looking at 2 main ones: the order Caudata, which includes the salamanders, which are super cool critters, and the order Anura, including frogs and toads. We're going to spend a lot of time on those guys. So let's start with our salamanders. We're going to see how their dual life begins in the water as an egg. The egg hatches out. We have a larva. here with, look what it's breathing through, gill buds, right? Gills. And here it's kind of interesting. In this particular species right here, I'll show you a picture in a minute. The gills actually extend out of the area here with a big feathery kind of a crown looking thing. Those are the gills, right? And you can see them very well here. But once the adult has formed, notice the gills are gone because what are they breathing with now? Lungs and their skin, right? I'm going to show you a picture of this guy. You may have seen it before. It's called a mud puppy. There's one right there. Okay, they can get kind of long. I'm going to say they're anywhere from like 8 to 10 or 12 inches long. They can get big before they grow into their stage. I've just seen them that large, so I assume, maybe they don't get any bigger as an adult from that point. Generally, with that 3-chambered heart, they don't tend to get, even frogs and toads don't tend to get huge, really, really big, okay? They don't have to distribute the blood very far. Here's another picture close-up of those gills. You can see that feathery there is increasing the surface area for a good exchange of oxygen. The reason I've seen them before and have had them, we kind of tried to raise them. We found them at a bait shop. So I don't know what you're trying to catch with something that large, that bait that large, but they apparently do, so because that's where we bought one and we tried to raise it for a little while. It didn't work out very well. All right, I used to think this was called the fire salamander because it's red, but the truth is it's actually called a red salamander. So how about that? Not very creative on the naming of this one. But the fire salamander looks like this. And so the fire doesn't refer to his color so much as in both of these cases. This one, red means warning, right? Look at this black and yellow. It's supposed to scare you. Sure enough, both of these creatures have toxins in their skin. You do not want to touch these, okay? We're going to see a famous frog here in just a minute has a similar thing like that. So I'm guessing that maybe the fire part of fire salamander isn't the color, but maybe it hurts. It hurts like fire. I'm not sure. Here is an egg sac of a salamander. You can see that there's a stick right here because it's kind of floating, and the female would have laid it on something that would kind of keep it somewhat still in the water, kind of above the water, floating in the water. And you can see there's a bunch of eggs inside of there. I'm going to show you a close-up picture of one of those eggs. Look at that. How cute is that? We got a little critter developing right there inside of that egg. Super cool. All right, we're going to move on to frogs now. I want you to note a couple different things about this. We're going to see in a minute, we're going to have a chart that compares frogs with toads. But here you can see this is clearly a frog. This is what we would call a tree frog, possibly a green tree frog, I would guess. We have these in Texas whenever we have rainy years, which is more and more lately is rare. So we're still in a drought now. So I don't see them very much in drought times, but in wet times we see them quite a bit. Notice a few things: the shape, color, eyes, nose. Right here, this right here is really cool. It's called a tympanum. We'll get to that in just a minute. Notice these folded legs here because they're very powerful and they're very good at jumping. Let's look at some interesting features. Okay, we have the life cycle, which goes from egg to larva, which is called the tadpole, which breathes with gills, and then the adult. So we call that a complete metamorphosis, where the juvenile form doesn't look anything like the adult form. Okay, we kind of talked about that a little bit with insects. We're going to see here they breathe through there. Here we go. I need you to write this down. They have these 4 things. They have their skin, their nasal, called the nares, which is their nostrils, the lining of their mouth, gills as it have on lungs. Okay, so we have adult lungs right there. So lots of ways of getting oxygen. That becomes very efficient that way. They have something known as a nictitating membrane, also called a third eyelid. And what that does, you may have seen this before, like in birds, well, they'll bring that little eyelid up. It's clear. It's like they're wearing goggles underwater, and it allows for protection against dehydration with the water in their eyes. Also, if they happen to go underwater, they can raise that up like little goggles and still see. All right, the tympanum, I showed you that on that picture there. The tympanum it's an eardrum. The tympanum, like timpani, means drum. And it's like our eardrum, but it's external right there, and you can see it just behind the eyes, and it vibrates, and they are able to hear with that. They have a head and a trunk in their body with that kind of shape there. And then when it comes to making a noise, making a croaking noise, it's the males that do that. Especially their famous one, of course, would be the bullfrog that has a very loud croak when they're in the in the water, out in a pond or something. If you ever go out like for a walk in the evening on a summer night in Texas, you'll hear all sorts of noises. A lot of times it's different frogs croaking. Some croaks sound familiar, other ones almost sound like singing, But as you get close and they hear you, they stop and it becomes very quiet. So it's a little creepy that way. But it's only the males that do that. And can you imagine why? What are they doing that for? And if you said to attract a mate, you are correct. All right, this is the poison dart frog. I mentioned him earlier when I was talking about the salamanders with their skin, right? So we can see very bright colors. I particularly like this color combination of orange and blue. So they secrete on their skin a toxin, all right, which makes them poisonous to eat. So that is one of their defenses about becoming an eaten creature, right? They don't want to be eaten. They're protecting themselves. Their bright color is what warns others not to eat them. Now, they're called poison dart frogs because down in South America, Amazon area, places like that, jungle areas, some of the native people will dip there or will rub the tip of a dart on the skin of these creatures, and it's enough poison on there to take down whatever prey they're hunting with their blow dart guns. Okay, I don't know what they're hunting, if it's something small or large or whatever. And if it doesn't kill them, it can immobilize them so that they can go hunt with them. So pretty cool. Don't touch them if you see one. Even though they're beautiful, it can absorb into your skin. All right, question. Do amphibians hibernate? The answer is yes. In the cold months, they start to really slow down. That's why in the winter, even in Texas in the winter, you don't see many frogs and toads around because they're all finding a place to stay warm somewhere. They're cold-blooded creatures. Therefore, they cannot regulate their body temperature, so they have to find a way from getting, too cold. So a lot of times what they'll do is they'll go into an hibernation mode, which means that their bodily functions are slowed way down. And look at these guys. You can see in the picture they've dug a hole underground. They found a place to sort of rest. It's a little warmer under there with the soil. It can get real cold, of course, with the snow above. I will tell you this. There's been a report of a frog that was found completely frozen. I mean, we're talking like a popsicle, frozen, and it actually warmed up, woke up, and was just fine. So how about that? They can take that even to freezing. I imagine there's limits to that. All right, here's our differences between frogs and toads. You probably want to maybe make a chart and put frogs on one side, toads on the other, and just see the differences that are going on here. Let's start with the skin. Frogs have a wet, smooth skin, typically more colorful. All right, and then a frog usually dry. It's dry, thick. It looks scaly, but it's not. It's bumpy. That'd be a better way of saying it. Usually in the brown kind of color like that. The frogs are more slim in their body style, and the toads are a little more stout, a little more chunky. We're going to see long legs for jumping. So frogs jump, right? Boing, they jump, like we saw in our first picture there. Whereas these shorter legs back here, the best they can do is pretty much hop. In fact, if you see a frog or a toad from a distance, by the way they're moving, you can tell. A frog will jump far, a toad will kind of hobble, kind of a little hopping here and there. Okay. We have fully webbed feet back here on their legs, and then shorter legs with maybe a little bit of webbing in there, but they mostly live on the land. They can swim. These guys mostly live in the water. They can jump around on the land. Okay. One thing I wanted to mention about frogs and toads is that when they're eating, their tongue is actually attached in the front. So when their tongue comes out, the back of the tongue, our tongue is attached in the back. So when we stick our tongue out, the tip of our tongue is coming out. Here, instead of the tip coming out, the back comes out, and they're able to go stretch it out kind of longer, and it's got a stickiness to it. We'll see that again here on some of our reptiles, okay? So I have a little GIF here. Let's see if it works. Okay, so you see he's catching a dragonfly. Now, can you tell? Oh, look at his little hands in there. I'm going to let it go again. Notice it's attached at the front. See that? Yeah, and then it pulls it in, and therefore when it pulls the tongue back in, it's back toward the back of their mouth, you see, so it takes it directly into their throat. That's pretty cool. All right, so the metamorphosis process right here, we start as an egg in the water. The eggs hatch out into a tadpole, all right, and as the breathing with gills, and it starts to form little legs right there. When it gets the legs formed, but still living underwater, we call it a metamorph. Some people call it a froglet. But it's moving its way toward developing internal lungs, okay? Notice the tail will disappear as an adult right there. And then when the frog is able and big enough, its lungs are fully formed. Now it can come out of the water, breathe with lungs, no longer breathing with gills. But remember those other modes of respiring. They have the skin, they have the inside of their mouths. All right, here's a tadpole. Look how cute. This one doesn't even have little legs yet. He's very young, and this one has formed its back legs. Okay, so you've probably seen some of those little kits where you can send off for a tadpole and then raise it at home, you know? Those are a lot of fun. Generally, when they send them to you, they should already have some of these back legs, okay? Because that's when it's going to be successful. If you go to a pond or find a little place where you find little tadpoles swimming around and you want to try to grab them and raise them at home, you can do that. But look at the tadpoles carefully and try to find some that at least have their little nubs, preferably little legs, almost as big as these, to take, okay? And then you got to, research what you're going to do to take the water with you because they need the water, and then research how you're going to feed them and that kind of thing. You'll have more success if you start with the tadpole with some legs on it like that. So good luck with that. All right, here we're going to look at the external anatomy. We're going to see the shape, of course. Very, frog shaped here, right? We have the color. This is the trunk and this is the head. Our jumping feet right here, the hind legs that are very good for jumping. We are looking at a frog here with the webbed feet. And then the front feet right here have little digits on them. We have our nares or nostril, eyes, and there's a tympanum. That's where they're going to do their hearing. You may need to draw this as well. Go ahead and pause it and draw. All right, we're moving on now to reptiles. Reptiles are pretty cool. They are different from amphibians, and we'll see how. So what is a reptile? Here's the criteria we use to put them in this group. They're covered with tough, dry scales. That's different from an amphibian, right? These scales are different. They're not going to have that method of breathing through their skin. It doesn't have to be wet. I will say amphibians need to always have access to moisture, okay? They can dry out. That's one of their most common ways of dying. For instance, my kids caught a little beautiful tree frog one time and brought it to the house. Well, it hopped away in my house, and we weren't able to find it. And it ended up dying because it didn't have enough water, so they have to have that water. Reptiles aren't as vulnerable that way because they're tough, dry scales that actually they're there to keep them from being dehydrated. They're ectothermic or cold-blooded, same as the amphibian. They cannot regulate their body temperature. They breathe through lungs their whole life. Interestingly, we're going to see a picture of the anatomy of the snake here coming up. The lungs are long, like the snake is long. Okay, they have a 3-chambered heart, so that's similar, right? And they produce an amniotic egg. Okay, an amniotic egg is one that we're going to look at more closely. It's similar to a chicken's egg. You know what it is. It's got everything inside that it needs. Okay, they're mostly oviparous, so they mostly lay eggs outside of their body, and then they hatch outside of the body, okay? And there are some exceptions, kind of like our sharks. Okay, let's look at their skin. Their scales are tough and dry. They overlap kind of like the, what do you call those tiles on a roof? Shingles on a roof, they overlap. That is to preserve their internal moisture so they don't lose anything moisture to the outside by evaporation or even dripping or cutting or something like this. It also serves for insulation. Since they're cold-blooded, they need to stay warm. In the early spring, you might see a snake because it's outside sunning itself, to warm up. That's what they're doing. They're made up of dead tissue. They cannot grow. Therefore, reptiles have to go through a molting process, and their new skin is hard. And it's a vulnerable time for reptiles when molting takes place. If you've ever owned a snake as a pet, they give you a couple of hints when it's molting time. They slow down. Their eyes kind of get covered up, and you have to just kind of leave them alone. Go away. They're needing to meditate on their molting. So they're vulnerable then. Here's a close-up picture of a beautiful snake with the overlapping of those scales. This is really close. Lovely colors there, yeah. And then this one's a little farther back. You can see there makes a pattern, which is pretty cool, right? You can see the overlapping, especially here. See how much the overlapping takes place right there. And then we have those beautiful markings. Most creatures have specific markings so that a herpetologist or they can tell the difference, by looking at their skin, what they are. All right, here's our amniotic egg. This is, I believe, a chicken's egg, but it's similar. It's also an amniotic egg. You may need to stop the presentation and draw this and label this. Okay, so we have our egg shape. The difference, of course, with the reptile's egg shell, the shell's not hard like a chicken's egg. All right, we have the albumin, which is a protein that's very slippery. If you think about the white of a regular chicken's egg, it's slippery like that. It's there for insulation. It's there for water. It's there for protection as far as, bumping around, that kind of thing. And then inside here's our little embryo developed. Remember, the egg is for the baby, yeah, and then it's being um, nourished by the nutrients of the egg yolk. All right, and then we have other features of the atlantis and the chorion here protecting that around like that. Okay, so once again, if you're going to draw it, remember to label it. All right, let's look at the 4 major orders we're going to spend some time on today. The first order is order Squamata. That includes the snakes and lizards. I think we're actually going in this order as well. Okay, order Testudines, which is turtles and tortoises. Crocodilia, I think it gives that one away. That would be alligators and crocodiles. And then the weird one, the order Sphinodontia. All right, has something to do with their teeth. It's the only one that survives in that. We kind of think of it as a leftover dinosaur, if you will, called a Turatara. And we'll get to him in just a minute. But we're going to start with snakes and lizards. So let's compare them, just like we did frogs and toads. What is the difference between snakes and lizards? Here we go. We have a chart. Once again, if you need to copy this chart down, you can pause the presentation and do that. All right, our lizards have 2 pair of limbs, front legs, back legs. And our snakes famously have no limbs, right? On your belly you shall go, right? The curse in the garden right there. And it does have special scales for that. We'll look at that in just a minute. Lizards can hear. They have a tympanum, similar to the frog. Snakes can't hear at all. They're completely deaf, all right? But their ability to, quote unquote, smell and see are so advanced that they know you're there, especially in the dark. They can see you, right? And they can feel movement really well, but they can't actually hear you. The lizards have uniform scales all over their body. It looks the same all over, whereas the snakes have specialized scales on their belly called scutes, and that's so they can move, all right? Lizards have eyelids. They blink their eyes, where snakes have no eyelids. They don't blink, and that's one of the reasons some people think that we're so creeped out by them is because, you know, they stare at you. You know, they stare at you the whole time and they never blink, so it's a little creepy. All right, this is the iguana, one of a famous kind of a lizard. They're fairly large. I'm going to say they can be, I'm going to say they get 2 feet long or so. Here's one sitting in a tree. It's kind of a funny story. Remember, they're cold-blooded, so this one looks like it's out getting some sun. We have a large population of iguana in Florida. They weren't natural to Florida. People had brought some as pets, some got out, but they flourished there because Florida is essentially a tropical place all year round. But in the year 2026, we had some cold weather. It was brief, but it was pretty cold. It got all the way down to Florida. And a bunch of these iguana were They froze and they were falling out of trees. And because they were so cold, they'd clunk, they just fell out like rocks. They would fall on people's cars and houses and stuff like this. I believe they were mostly okay. You know, I think they were able to survive because they would warm up eventually. I also think that, if I'm not mistaken, the state of Florida used this as an opportunity to collect a bunch of them up and move them into, some place where they could be relocated. They're kind of, I don't know if invasive species is the right way of saying that, but they weren't natural there, and there's a lot of them there now. So I think that's the case. The largest lizard is called the Komodo dragon. It's called that because it's from the island of Komodo out in the Pacific somewhere. And they're very large. They're about the size of a dinner table. They're, several feet long, 4 feet long or so. They're very heavy and dense. And so they have, you notice here it says septic saliva. They have some sharp teeth. Notice that tongue coming out. That tongue, like snakes, right there. That's coming out for the sense of smell. They're smelling and checking out their environment. But their teeth in there, their mouth is very dirty. And what I mean by that, there's all sorts of crazy bacteria growing in their mouth. If you should be bitten by a Komodo dragon, you need to get it checked out because the infection can kill you. Okay, so it's not venom, but it is bacterial infection. And furthermore, their strength of their bite, it's so strong. Their jaws are so strong that if you got your arm in their mouth and they bit you, they probably could break your arm. It's there, depending on who you are, how strong your bones are. They have a very, very strong bite. So these guys are scary. Notice it's known as a dragon, because it kind of reminds people of the old medieval type things. All right, our venomous, now talking about venom, this would be one that actually does bite you and inject venom into you. This is called the Gila monster. They're found in the United States in desert areas. They're much smaller than a Komodo dragon. They're probably, I'm going to say, between I don't know, 4 and 8 inches long. But they have this beautiful, bright orange and the black on there, which is a warning. It's not the warning the same as the fire salamander, where you can't touch it. This is more of a beware, I'm going to bite you with some venom. Right. Let's see. Our colorful lizard, you gotta love the chameleon right there. Beautiful. They are native to the island of Madagascar, which you probably know. Notice those beautiful colors. So they can change colors. A lot of lizards can change colors, and they can do it fairly quickly. The chameleon is just very, very famous for these beautiful colors. Now check him out. He's on a brown branch right here. You can see dark green behind him, but look at his colors. He's got bright green, bright blue, reds, yellows, the orange on the throat there. Do you think he's trying to hide? Is this a camouflage effort? No. This guy's advertising. He's saying, hey, come check me out, right? So this is probably mating time, this kind of thing. But they can look in the mirror. I mean, I've seen videos where somebody has a pet chameleon. It looks in the mirror. It thinks it's looking at another chameleon. And the males will turn a dark red color, kind of like I'm gonna fight you kind of a thing, so they use it for that kind of thing. Here's one eating. You can see his tongue coming out. I can't tell from here if his tongue is attached in the front or the back. I can't tell because I can't remember about these guys. But notice it's long, it's very sticky on the end there. It's gonna get that poor little moth and eat him up. Here is this one is I believe a horny toad, right? We have these, used to have these in Texas, eating an ant. Looks like his tongue's attached in the back. Okay. Pretty cool. Sticky tongue. A cute lizard. This is a gecko. In the central part of Texas, we have things called house geckos. They're kind of this color, maybe a little, not quite as yellow, mostly all white. They're fun. They're about 3 inches long and smaller. They just are very cute. We like them. They seem to be friendly, if you will, if you can call it that. Notice its tail looks similar to the Gila monster tail, that fat tail like that. But they do have scales on them. They also reminiscent of an amphibian, but they are actually reptiles. And something interesting about them, notice their feet right there. They're really good climbers, and the reason is the underside of their feet have all of these little special pads, right, that are increasing the surface area. They stretch it out, and it allows them to hold on to things strongly. They can climb straight up a wall. They can go across a ceiling. They can defy gravity because of that. And it's just a beautiful design of this just extra surface area to just kind of get really grippy. It's not sticky so much as it's just grippy. They're able to hold on there. Pretty cool. The frilled lizard, okay, the frilled lizard here you can see has extra tissue that he mostly holds down flat. But then when he wants to show off, he'll open it up. So there are a couple reasons why he might be doing this. You can probably guess. One of them would be to intimidate. So in other words, it makes him look way larger than he really is. Another could be to impress. Another even could be for cooling. But let's watch a little video and see something about these guys.
And up in these trees live big and watchful lizards. A frilled lizard can spot its prey from 3 meters up a tree. All it has to do then is jump down and catch it. For their size and big teeth, frilled lizards have moderate tastes. They eat almost nothing but insects. A good feeding area like this is worth hanging on to. A frilled lizard won't tolerate a rival in its territory.
Oh, there we go.
Competing males hiss and lash their tails, raising their frills to make themselves look bigger than they really are. But it's dangerous down there on the ground. Whistling kites eat frilled lizards round here. All that frill waving and hissing forgotten, the lizards make a 2-legged dash back to the safety of their trees. rough bark helps them get a grip as they climb. Once safely back up there, they make themselves look as small and inconspicuous as possible. And for 90% of their lives, this is where they stay, using the gum trees as lookout posts and bolt holes.
Okay. Notice that when they were running on the two back legs. That is unusual in the animal kingdom. For, we can see, apes will walk around on their two legs, not 100% of the time, but often. And these guys were running on the two legs like that. We have birds, of course, walk on their legs, but mostly it's humans who walk on two legs. All right. The horned toad, or the horny toad, we call it here in Texas, they're fun. Sadly, I don't know, who is it? TCU horned frogs, right? They're named after these guys. Very, looks like a little dragon of some sort. They have really cool spikes and stuff like that. I remember as a kid we would catch them and raise them, You don't see them as much anymore. And sadly, the reason for that is fire ants. So notice, remember we saw that video of them eating an ant. Well, the fire ants will attack these guys, especially when they're in their eggs or just hatched out. So they're very vulnerable to that. So we have started to lose our horned toad population in Texas, unfortunately. But they're very cool creatures. One thing that they can do, they literally can squirt blood out of their eyes. It is not a poison so much as it is just an intimidation factor. I would suspect it's a stressful time for them to do that, but it is something that is true. They will squirt blood out of their eyes. Okay, let's take a look at some snakes now. Snakes are pretty cool. Now this picture, I'm pretty sure that whoever took this picture has enhanced it in some way to make that blue bluer. And the reason I say, look how green those plants are. It's kind of enhanced. So I can't be sure. I just thought it was a great picture. I like it. Snakes can be beautiful. Once again, though, they, are kind of creepy, right? They creep us out a little bit. That they don't blink, right? They got their little tongue coming out and all that kind of stuff. So it's a little creepy. This is the internal anatomy of a snake. We're looking at from the ventral side here. You can see what I wanted you to notice. There's that three-chambered heart right there, right? A little ways down. This is esophagus here. Look at the lung. Whoosh! And the lung is going. They don't show it quite as long as they are. Very long. The lungs are long, like their bodies are long, right? Their stomach, everything's long. Their gut coming down here like this. Okay. I want you also to notice those scales on the underside. We'll get a better picture of that here. So here we go. So the specialized scales on their belly are called scutes. The small scales right here are the ones on top, the overlapping ones on the top, right? Now these scutes, it's a way of getting to move. Remember when we looked at the earthworms and how they squished their body and then moved it and squid? They had those little hooks there. These snakes, what they will do is they will actually use muscular movement. They don't have any little hooks, nothing like that on there, but they will use muscular movement to move. Sometimes they will move straight. Sometimes they'll kind of slither, right? We talk about snakes are slithering, and that's because they need that little bit of sideways action to catch that little bit of ground, to get a little friction there so they can move their bodies. I'm going to show you this video of it's called a sidewinder. Super cool.
Side-to-side motion allows the snake to move using a minimum of energy. It also reduces contact between the sidewinder's body and the scorching sand. Only two short pieces of its body touch the ground at any one time. Like many desert animals, the sidewinder is nocturnal in the heat of summer, only coming out when the temperatures are at their lowest. But this snake's most remarkable adaptation is the fact that it can survive without a single drop of water.
Aww.
Getting all it needs from its prey.
Poor lizard. Oops, that's in there twice. Okay, their senses. Remember we talked about how they're deaf. And when it says here poor vision, poor vision in the sense of their eyes, right? But they have vision in the sense of their other senses here. The sense of smell, namely. Okay, so this is pretty cool. The sense of smell is acute due to something called Jacobson's organ. Do we see that here? Where is it? I thought it was labeled. There it is. Jacobson, look at that little pit right there in the top of their mouth. See that tongue? That forked tongue comes out, and they kind of send it out for chemical signals. They bring it in and actually put it up in there, and they can tell. They can, I want to say, see or taste or smell, or however you want to put it like that. Notice they have quite a long nostril as well for the sense of smell. And so they're able to, and there's some snakes, we'll get to here in just a minute, who can actually basically see in the dark, if you will. So we may talk about poor eyesight in the sense of eyes like ours that can see distance and close up and this kind of thing. But these other ways allow them to enhance that through the sense of smell and taste. Oh, I guess I don't have that picture of the pit. Maybe we're getting to the pit viper. We'll see it here in a second. Okay, what about eating? They eat things generally larger themselves, right? Here's one eating an egg. Got to watch out for those snakes that'll steal your eggs. What we have is we have the ability for their jaw to completely separate, okay? So right here, that jaw is separated top and bottom, and then it goes back, right? Notice those backward-facing teeth as well that are going to grip whatever they're eating and then pull it and use the muscular action of their throat area here to pull it back. I will say there are, when they have a large creature in them or a large egg for a smaller snake, they're in a vulnerable position because they can't move as easily when their belly is so full of something, so they kind of have to sort of hide while they're digesting this food. Here is an anaconda that was actually, this is a dead one. They've caught it. You can see the rope around its neck right here. Its mouth is open there. Obviously, it had swallowed something rather large. If it's an anaconda, it's probably down in South America somewhere. This is probably a green anaconda. They are quite large. And remember, the way they get their prey is they will wrap them up and suffocate them, and then they will swallow them. But yeah, they're in a vulnerable spot there. The snake shedding the skin, right? So we can look at a snake molting here, and they'll get to a point where all of a sudden they are getting bigger on the inside and they need new skin. So they'll begin rubbing their head. Their eyes kind of haze over. So if you have one as a pet, you'll see their eyes will get real hazy, and you'll know it's time. And that's when you just know to leave them alone. In nature here, they'll start rubbing their head against something till they'll break that skin off. They'll by rippling their muscles, they'll peel themselves out of the old skin that looks kind of all dried up. And you've probably all seen a snake skin before. Sometimes you don't necessarily see the head part as well as this is like that. As they do slither out of it, it turns the old skin completely inside out. And so when you get an old snake skin, you'll see the scales are a little more formed on the inside of it because it's been turned inside out. Okay, depending on the type of snake, he'll molt several times till they get to the size they're going to live at. The anaconda, here we're looking at the way of eating. Once again, this is a constrictor, which I mentioned earlier. This is how beautiful this guy is right here. Probably a green anaconda, maybe brown. It's hard to tell. Here you can see guys who have caught one. Boy, howdy, it's big, isn't it? Can they eat a human? A small human. It's possible, but you know and they can constrict it. Sometimes they'll constrict and kill a prey and not eat it because it's too big, which is just a waste, right? Snake eggs. Here we're going to see this is literally a female snake laying some eggs. And the reason I like this picture to show the eggs is it's coming out. See how it's bent like that? That's because the egg shell is not like a chicken egg. It's not hard. It's more what we call leathery. Okay, it's a leathery egg. Here you can see a snake hatching out of that, and you can see that leathery kind of texture to that eggshell. Now this is an interesting picture right here because these critters were born like that. In other words, it looks like live birth. Do you remember what that's called? It's not oviparous, it's ovoviviparous, right? So they're formed eggs, but the eggs develop inside mama. And then they're born looking like this. I can't remember what this snake is called. It's some sort of light-colored snake. Really pretty. All right, what do we have here? Okay, the snakes we need to worry about, especially if you live in Texas. we have the venomous ones, right? So this is called a coral snake. You may have seen one. They're actually quite beautiful in their coloring. And so it's similar to one that's not venomous called the corn snake, right? So how do we tell? Red and yellow, red touch yellow, kill a fellow, red touch black, friend of Jack, right? So this is red touch yellow, meaning this is indeed a coral snake. I will tell you they are what we call a short fang snake, meaning they have to kind of chew on you a little bit to get their venom into you, unlike the rattlesnake, right? That's almost like a little, hypodermic needle. And so therefore they're not as much of a threat to us. They're also fairly small. Their mouth is fairly small. Will they bite you? Sure, because it's a defensive movement. Will that be a problem? Yes. You probably need to get that checked out. But they don't inject as much venom into you, is my point. But they have plenty in there. And they use it, of course, to capture their own prey. That's what it's for. Here's a rattlesnake famously around this area. They are a pit viper. You can see their flattened head right here. There's their rattler. The rattler is interesting. There's nothing inside of it. It's just the pieces of the tissue, almost like some of the scutes that are put together, and they are loosely put together, so then you can take it and rattle it, and it makes noise. You've probably seen one. We have those in Texas for sure. This is called the water moccasin or the cottonmouth. They swim really well. Both these two are long fang snakes, so therefore they can inject you. And then, of course, we have the beautiful, beautiful copperhead right here, a short fang snake right here. They're found. This is kind of a light-colored one. You can see them, especially early in the spring when they're kind of newly hatching out. They'll be bright orange, a beautiful, beautiful bright orange. They're a little more dangerous than our coral snake right there because they do have a bigger head, and they can get you. All right, let's talk about our vipers, or our pit vipers, okay? The most famous would be, of course, the rattlesnake. So we're going to see right here the big fangs. Now, the fangs do fold back this way. They only stretch them out when they're going to use them. And look at that venom gland. Woo! That's a big old gland devoted to shooting that venom straight out of it. It's like a hypodermic needle coming right out there, and they can inject it right into their prey or right into you. Notice that compressor muscle right there. It squeezes it out, and they are able to inflict quite a bit of damage. If you've ever, I don't know, hopefully you've never been bitten by one of these snakes. It is painful. You need to get to a doctor. You need to have what we call antivenin, which will counteract the poison. By the way, they do make antivenin from venom, so they have to capture snakes and get their venom from them so that they can use it to make antivenin. Here we can see one of the venom coming out there, dripping out of that extended fang from a rattlesnake. Probably somebody holding this guy, maybe even collecting the venom. All right, so here's our pit viper. Now, I told you it's a pit. Remember, their eyesight is limited, but they've got that tongue that comes out, right, and that Jacobson's organ that allows them to see. These guys also have this thing called a pit, and that pit can actually function as I want to say vision, because it's like a infrared vision that they have. Remember, they can feel vibration. They can't hear you, but they can feel vibrations, and they can smell you, and they can therefore quote unquote see you, just not the same way we think about vision. Okay, we're in order testudines now, and we're going to be looking at the difference between turtles and tortoises. Once again, you might want to stop the presentation so you can fill out this chart or make your own chart. Let's start with turtles. Live most of their lives in the water. They can come on land. They will come on land, especially the famous marine turtles will come on land to lay their eggs. Tortoises live on land. They even live in very dry places. Turtles have webbed feet. Tortoises do not. Turtles have a streamlined body shape for swimming, and tortoises don't. They have a taller shell. A lot of times you could take out a shell, and if it's kind of up and mounded, you would know that came from a tortoise. Here's a tortoise. They live very long lives. This one is probably in a zoo. Frequently, when you go to a zoo and see a tortoise, it is the oldest creature there at the zoo because they live a long time. Look at all those scales and everything. Crazy. Freshwater turtles, we have around these in North America. You may have seen these guys swimming around in your ponds. Let's see. Common snapping turtle for sure. I feel like the slider we've seen around Texas. So various turtles. The painted turtle might be the kind that you buy in the store to have a pet. Yeah, they're kind of fun to have as pets, I guess. Not very cuddly. All All right, sea turtles. All right, we can see these guys swimming along. Notice their legs, their limbs are, like fins, right? They're for swimming. The hawksbill can reach up to 250 pounds, and they do live a long time. Here we have the leatherback, up to 1,500 pounds. That's the largest. Now, it says here the largest reptile. Okay. Largest turtle for sure. They're called leatherback because they have a different kind of a shell. It's more leathery than hard like a shell. We'll get to the shell here in just a minute. Here's one, a female laying her eggs on the beach. She's come up to the beach. That's what this one is doing, coming up to the beach to lay her eggs. Here the eggs are getting laid into the sand, right? And, oh, isn't that cute? Here's one hatching out. With my marine biology class, we go through an exercise where we talk about the hatching turtles, and we go through all of the hazards they have to go through. We have 100 little ping pong balls, and then they're numbered, and you have to say, well, number 3 just got eaten by a bird and this kind of thing. And at the end, we had like one surviving creature. Yeah, so that's why they lay so many, because they are really part of the circle of life, and they feed lots and lots of other critters, sadly. All right, here we are at order Crocodilia. We're going to once again have a chart here that you may want to copy down, the differences between alligators and crocodiles. Okay, alligators tend to be dark gray and black, where crocodiles are brown or green. The alligator has a U-shaped snout, and the crocodile has a V-shaped snout. So you can't see it very well in this picture, but I'll show you another one. Alligators live in freshwater, including in America. We have the Mississippi alligator. Florida has alligators, famously, of course. And then crocodiles tend to be saltwater or brackish. Brackish means it would be like an estuary where there's water, fresh water and salt water mixing. Alligators lay their eggs in vegetation near their fresh water, and crocodiles lay their eggs in mud or sand. Now, let's look at this one really closely. An alligator, the teeth on the lower jaw are not visible when the mouth is closed. Okay, alligator, not visible. Crocodile, the teeth on the lower jaw are visible when the mouth is closed. Okay, that's important. So I thought I had a picture. Oh, here we go. The way to tell the difference between an alligator and a crocodile is alligators have a thick, blunt snout, U-shaped. Crocodiles have a thinner, more pointed snout, V-shaped. And their teeth don't fit in their mouths. All right, so do I have the picture? Okay, here's the picture from the top. The Mississippi American alligator, U-shaped, where the saltwater crocodile, V-shaped. And then, which one is it? Mouth is closed. Can we see the lower teeth? Yes. So which one is it? Crocodile, right? Am I right? Let's go back. Yes, crocodile. I get that mixed up sometimes, y'all. Caiman is like a tiny crocodile, all right, a tiny alligator. They live in South America. Sometimes you'll see people who will be showing them off as, here's a baby alligator kind of a thing. A lot of times what they're showing the kids so they can touch them because they're pretty safe to handle. They're usually actually caiman. All right, here's our last order, the Sphenodontia or Dontia. It's the Turatara of New Zealand. It's the last one. Now notice it looks a lot like a lizard, looks a lot like an iguana, but it is different. There are some things that it's enough difference to put them in their own order, which is a lot to ask here in biology, right? So here we go. They do have their scaly body. They have this cool kind of dinosaur dorsal, pointy stuff. Large head, big mouth, this kind of thing. So what is it that is so different about them? Well, one of those things right here is called the pineal or pineal eye. They have what we call a third eye, y'all. Third eye. Notice 2 feet long. Pretty cool. There it is. Do you see that little? Yeah, you can see it right there. It's generally more commonly found in the younger juvenile versions, and as they grow older, the scales will actually cover that up. What's it for? We're not exactly sure, but when they're younger, it does sense light and dark, so perhaps it's some sort of protective measure, something along those lines, but very, very unusual. Okay, if you have an opportunity to do a frog dissection, that would be great. You'll be looking for, it's a classic, most biology students do a frog dissection. You can do a virtual frog dissection online, where somebody else is doing it, or even like almost a, animated version of it. That's better than nothing. But it's really great to take a look inside of them. I love looking at the capillaries on their skin. Their lungs are like little raisins that are squishy, like a little raisin sponge kind of a thing. It looks something like that. This would be like a preserved critter would look like. In this, you can see, I believe, the heart. Here's the stomach, the guts. We have dissected before where we found, actually, bugs and things in the stomach, which is kind of fun. Okay, students, I hope you enjoyed that lecture, and I hope you are enjoying this last part of your biology module. All right, see you soon.